welcome to my Christmas card series for 2022. This is called Case Me a Christmas Card, and in this series I will be basically copying and sharing, selectively editing cards from card making friends of mine. And today I'm going to be casing a card by Ardyth Percy-Robb, who's in Canada. So I'm starting with a piece of Bristol, Strathmore Bristol cardstock, and a super smooth cardstock that takes water well, because I am going to be using water for this card. And I'm using the Simon Says stamp Winter Floral stamp here, this big background stamp. And I inked it up in some Wow embossing ink. And now I'm going to be using some Wow Opaque Bright White embossing powder. And so I'm going to be embossing this image in white and doing a little bit of emboss resist with it. But not my usual emboss resist, a little bit different. And I'm actually going to be casing a technique that Ardyth has done. So you can see I'm just tipping off all of the excess embossing powder here and funneling it back into my little jar, and melting this embossing powder with my heat tool. So it takes a little bit of time when you've got a big background stamp like this. So these are the cards that Ardyth made, and I'm going to be getting a very similar look with my cards here. Hers were hugs cards, mine are going to be Christmas cards. But because I've got this big background panel that I'm going to colour up, I'm actually going to be using this background on 3 separate cards. Now, what I'm going to be doing today is what Ardyth did. She used some powdered watercolours on her card, and so I've pulled out my Magenta Nuance powders. I have a set of 15 of these powders. So I've pulled out a variety of different colours here. I've got a couple of reds, and I've got a couple of greens, and I've got a blue. So I'm using a variety here. And I've just sprayed a little bit of water into my palette and sprinkled some of the powder onto that drop of water. Now I've also covered my panel of Bristol with water here. I've just used my big paintbrush, and you can see that some of the colour already got onto it as I brushed it across. That doesn't matter, because I'm going to be adding so much colour onto this panel that a few little stray bits of pigment powder won't really make any difference. So I've started off by adding really intense colour to the centre of these larger poinsettia images on this background stamp. And now I'm just using a wet paintbrush to drag that colour out to the edges of those petals to fill in the flowers. I'm using a slightly different red here. You can see this red's a bit more of a crimson red, whereas the other one was more of a cherry red. One red's towards the orange end of the red scale, one's towards the blue end of the red scale. And so I've used the more sort of orangey red on the berries. Now I'm going in with a slightly bluish green. I mixed some of the blue with the green to do the holly leaves here. And there's a few different types of leaves on this background stamp, and I've coloured them in various different shades of the green. Now, for the background, I decided to use a different watercolour, and that is my Zig marker. So this particular Zig marker is the colour blue, and it would have to be my favourite Zig colour. And I've dried off my panel, and now what I'm doing is I'm just tracing around the edges of each of these images, so basically colouring in the background with this blue, but I'm not really taking a lot of care. I'm just getting some colour in there around the edges of the image. And once I've done that, I'm just going to take my spray bottle of tap water and just spray all over, and that will allow that water to spread out and take up all of the space in between those images and around those images. You can see in a couple of places it didn't really spread out as much as I wanted to, so I'm just using my paintbrush to spread the colour a little bit more, and then I will dry that off. So that's a really quick way of using watercolours, because the Zig markers are a watercolour marker, using it to sort of fill in an image nice and quickly. And you also get a bit more of a sort of organic look to the colouring when you use a whole lot of water like that, rather than colouring in every little bit with a marker. All right, so I dried that off with my heat tool, and now I'm cutting it down. So the first thing I'm doing is just going around the edges of the image just to cut off any of the stray edges that weren't stamped, just so I know exactly what I've got to work with here, and make sure I've got nice square edges. So once I've done that, I'm going to be cutting this panel down into 3 parts. So first of all, I'm cutting it so that it is ever so slightly narrower than the width of my card base. So one panel is going to go as a stripe, but this panel that I'm left with is narrower than my card bases. And then I'm going to cut this on an angle, so I have something just a little bit different. And of course, I do this quite often with coloured panels like this, but just to make it a little bit different, I decided to put one on the bottom of the card and one on the top of the card. Now, the cards that I'm casing, one of Ardyth's cards, she used a scalloped edge on it, so I went digging through really old tools that I had in a drawer here, and I found this very old Fiskars punch, and it's no longer available, I'm sorry, but there are lots of other punches and dies that you could use to create this similar look here. Okay, so that's what my 3 cards are going to look like. Now I just have to put them together, and I'm just using my Kokuyo tape runner here to stick these panels on. Because my panel is narrower than my card front, I'm just lining it up so that there is a bit of a border on the left, right, and on the bottom there. With this one, again, I'm going to put a little white border on the left, right, and on the top this time, because, I'm constructing the card slightly differently. And then the last one, I'm just going to have the panel going straight up and down on the side of the card. Again, I am going to leave a little bit of a border because I love my white space. Now, with the sentiments on these cards, I thought I didn't really need to do much else with these cards. I didn't really want any extra embellishments or shine or anything like that. So all I needed was to choose a sentiment and to stamp it onto my card. So with this one, that was the only one I needed to sort of trim off a little bit. And now I've got my sentiments. So these sentiments are from the Altenew stamp set called Warm Blessings, and I'll be using this a lot in my cards this year. Absolutely adore these sentiments, and you can see I've chosen a different sentiment for each of my 3 cards, and I'm stamping them in Altenew Obsidian ink, which is a great intense black ink, fabulous to get crisp sentiments. So there's my 3 cards. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you so much to Ardyth for being my guest today. I've put a link to her blog post in the description below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.